We're going to start out with an example of summing up an array of numbers. If you come over to the project view, you'll see a defaults folder, and inside of there is an O1 defaults. Open up the sum.js file. We have some sample data to work with up here, and then we have a sum function, and then I've invoked this sum function with our array of numbers, the very first example up here at the top. And then if we go ahead and come up and run this, pop open the dev tools in the browser, you'll see that we get the number 23, and if you sum up the numbers above, you'll confirm that that's the right result. Now, this sum function works fine and dandy. It has a for loop. When we pass an array to it, it just goes through and sums up the elements. However, let's switch to the numbers 1 array, which is actually undefined up above. What do you think is going to happen when I run this in the browser again with this new numbers 1 array that's undefined? Well, when I run it, I get a type error because there's no length property when I'm trying to iterate through the elements in the array. So our numbers array is undefined, so we can't access length. Now, what's one way we could deal with this if, say, that we wanted to ignore something that's undefined and just return 0 in that case? Well, have you ever done anything like this in the past where you take the numbers array that's passed in and you coalesce with an empty array to provide a default value? And I say coalesce, but actually I'm using the logical OR operator here. So this is the logical OR operator, which means that if this value on the left-hand side is truthy, it will be used. In other words, if this expression on the left-hand side is truthy, it'll be used. And if not, then the expression on the right-hand side will be used instead, hence giving us this coalescing behavior. Now, if I come back to the browser and reload, what's going to be different now? What are we going to get in the output? Well, let's find out. We get 0 now, as intended, and this might be a nice thing to provide as a library author. If we are providing a series of functions that work on arrays, we might want the default for a sum to be 0. It kind of makes sense. If you pass me an empty array, you would get 0. So if you pass me an undefined array, it might be perfectly reasonable to give you 0 as well. Now, there's one more case that I want to talk about, and that is the case where we pass numbers 2. And numbers 2, you can see, has an undefined element. The third element is undefined. Otherwise, the numbers actually match the first numbers array. So we should get the same sum result if we were to ignore undefined elements. And as a library author, maybe this is a decision that we want to make. It's very possible that people would like to pass arrays to us that maybe came from some tool that read out numbers from a file. And if there's a line in that file that's empty, maybe there's an undefined number then in the array that comes back to represent the empty line. Perfectly reasonable, and so we might just want to ignore those undefined numbers. Now I want you to pause the recording and make a modification to the sum function to perform the same defaulting behavior that we just did with the entire numbers array, but just on the level of an individual element in the array. So pause the video and work on that, and then come back. What we can do when we read the element here out of the array, we can coalesce here as well. This time we'll coalesce by 0, though, to provide a default value of 0 in case there's an undefined element. And if we come back to the browser and reload now, we get 23 as well for numbers 2, which makes sense. The rest of the elements match our initial array of just numbers. So these are some nice features that we might like to add. Say if we're writing some library like low dash or underscore that provides a bunch of operations that work on arrays. And while this works, this isn't always the most pleasant thing to look at, and this is quite a bit of typing, and this logical OR operator has some edge cases that might surprise us. It's not really a coalesce operator, and a lot of people that aren't familiar with JavaScript may not know what this expression is doing. If we really wanted to be safe, we'd write an if check and check for numbers to be undefined, and then overwrite the value in that case only. But that code is even more verbose. Well, turns out now, in ES6, we have default parameter values. So we can yank this line out here. I'm just going to run this in the browser to show that it doesn't work again. And then we can modify our parameter list here to provide a default value. Now, before I do this, can you take a stab at what this syntax might be like? Pause the recording and try and get this to work to provide a default for the numbers array. Okay, so here's what this looks like. Just an equal sign, and then square brackets for an empty array. If I hop over to the browser and I reload, you can see everything's working. Now we have our default for the middle case when the array is undefined. So that's how easy it is to define a default value for a parameter to a function. Let's move on and talk about defaults in destructuring.